A poor woman is thrown out of a luxury restaurant while the manager is away. When the manager finds out, what he reveals shocks everyone. But before that, consider subscribing to the channel so we can keep sharing amazing stories. Clara had always been a woman of resilience. Growing up in a small rundown house at the edge of the city, life had never been kind to her. She worked tirelessly as a cleaner in various offices, sweeping floors and scrubbing desks long after the workers had gone home. Though her income was meager, she saved every penny she could. She wasn't saving for anything grand like a new house or a luxurious vacation, but for a simple night of joy, an elegant dinner at a restaurant she'd only ever seen from the outside. The restaurant, located in the heart of the city, was a symbol of everything Clara had dreamed of: luxury, beauty, and a fleeting moment where she could feel like she belonged to a world far different from her own. Each day as she walked past on her way to work, she'd catch glimpses of the warm glow inside, the laughter of well-dressed patrons, and the delicate clinking of glasses. She often wondered what it would feel like to sit among them, to be served with grace and treated with respect. Her dream wasn't just about the food or the atmosphere. It was a celebration of her hard work, a reward she had painstakingly earned. For months she denied herself small comforts, a new pair of shoes, a better coat for the winter, just so she could save enough money to enjoy one night where she could pretend, even for a few hours, that her struggles didn't define her. She deserved that, didn't she? To feel special, if only for a short while. Finally, the day came. Clara had gathered the money she needed, and she stood in front of her modest wardrobe, carefully selecting her best dress. Though it was old, it was clean and neatly pressed. She tied her hair back, letting a few strands frame her face, and applied a hint of lipstick she had been saving for a special occasion. As she looked in the mirror, she smiled at herself. It wasn't vanity, it was pride. She had worked for this moment, and she was determined to savor it. The evening was chilly, and she wrapped herself in a thin but well-loved coat before stepping outside. Her heart fluttered with anticipation as she walked through the bustling streets, the bright lights of the city feeling like they were guiding her toward her little piece of happiness. There was a lightness in her step, a glow in her eyes. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of accomplishment. Her journey was about to take her to the doorstep of the restaurant she had admired for so long, but her mind lingered on the present moment. Every step felt significant, every breath filled with possibility. She imagined herself walking through the grand doors, being greeted with warmth, and sitting down to a meal she had earned through sacrifice and perseverance. The restaurant stood before Clara like a palace, its grand exterior illuminated by soft golden lights. As she approached, her breath caught in her throat. The elegant decor, the polished marble floors, the chandeliers glittering like stars. It was even more beautiful than she had imagined. Everything about it exuded an air of exclusivity and refinement, the kind of place she had only seen in movies. For a moment, Clara felt small, out of place, as though she had stepped into a world where she didn't belong. But she quickly shook off the feeling. She had worked hard to be here. She had earned this. As she walked through the grand entrance, the warmth of the interior contrasted sharply with the cold night air outside. Her eyes darted around, taking in the opulence. White tablecloths adorned with glimmering silverware. Waiters gliding silently between tables. The murmur of conversations, mixed with the occasional clink of crystal glasses. It was everything she had envisioned during her long hours of work. But as soon as Clara crossed the threshold, she felt the weight of a dozen eyes on her. The staff, polished and perfectly uniformed, paused in their duties to glance her way. Their expressions were subtle but unmistakable. Raised eyebrows, tight-lipped smiles, a flash of curiosity quickly replaced by quiet disapproval. They were used to wealthy patrons, clients who wore designer suits and dresses, dripping in expensive jewelry. Clara, in her simple dress and well-worn coat, was an anomaly here. She could feel their judgment like a physical force, pressing against her back. But she held her head high and pressed forward. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to keep her composure. Tonight wasn't about them. It was about her. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to enjoy the reward she had promised herself. As she approached the reception desk, the maître d' eyed her carefully, his gaze flicking over her outfit before settling on her face. Clara, feeling a wave of nervousness wash over her, cleared her throat and spoke in a soft, hesitant voice. "Excuse me," she began, her words almost swallowed by the refined atmosphere. "I'd like a table, please." Mark, the sub-manager, stood behind the reception desk with an air of practiced indifference. He had grown accustomed to dealing with wealthy clients, those who radiated status and carried themselves with a certain arrogance that he had learned to tolerate over the years. So when Clara approached, her modest appearance starkly contrasting with the lavish setting, he barely concealed his disdain. Without saying a word, Mark let his eyes sweep over her. The simple dress, the worn coat, the faint scuffs on her shoes, none of it belonged in this world of gleaming chandeliers and fine dining. His lips curled into a tight, disapproving line as he straightened his posture. Clara, oblivious to his silent judgment, maintained her polite smile, waiting patiently for him to respond to her request for a table. But instead of addressing her with the same courtesy he would extend to any other guest, Mark's voice came out cold and sharp, almost dismissive. "This isn't the place for you," he said flatly, his words cutting through the elegant atmosphere like a knife. He didn't even bother checking the reservation book or glancing at the availability of tables. To him it was clear, Clara did not belong there, and he wasn't going to waste his time pretending otherwise. Clara's smile faltered as she absorbed the sting of his words. She opened her mouth, trying to find her voice amid the rising wave of embarrassment. "I've been saving for months," she began, her tone soft but resolute, as though explaining her reason would somehow justify her presence. But Mark wasn't interested in her story. He interrupted her with a wave of his hand, dismissing her explanation before it even began. "It doesn't matter," he said brusquely, leaning forward slightly as if to emphasize his point. "We don't serve people like you here." Without giving her a chance to respond, Mark gestured toward the entrance, silently commanding her to leave. Clara's attempt to argue further was cut short by his impatient glare. Before she knew it, she found herself being ushered toward the door, the eyes of other patrons now locked on her in a mix of curiosity and quiet judgment. Clara stumbled as she was pushed toward the exit, her feet moving instinctively, though her mind was still reeling from the harshness of Mark's words. She could hardly believe what had just happened. Her dream of celebrating a simple victory had been crushed so abruptly, and the weight of humiliation settled heavily on her shoulders. As she reached the front door, she glanced back over her shoulder, hoping, perhaps for some glimmer of decency, a sign that someone would step forward and stop this injustice. But no one did. As she stepped out into the cold night, the sharp chill hit her face, mingling with the warmth of her tears as they welled up in her eyes. She wiped at them hastily, but more kept coming. The busy street outside the restaurant was bustling with people, many of whom had seen the scene unfold. Some passers-by snickered quietly, whispering to each other as they watched her stumble away. Others shot her brief, pitying glances before returning to their own affairs, too preoccupied to intervene in a stranger's misery. Clara kept her head down as she hurried along the sidewalk, her vision blurred by tears. Her heart was heavy with sorrow, and a lump formed in her throat that made it difficult to breathe. Every step felt like a reminder of her failure, not just to secure a meal at the restaurant, but to be seen as someone worthy of respect. She had walked into that place with hope, with pride in what she had achieved through her own hard work, only to be thrown out as though she were nothing more than an inconvenience. Her thoughts raced as she moved further away from the restaurant, trying to make sense of it all. Why had something so simple, something that had meant so much to her, turned into such a nightmare? She had saved for months, made sacrifices, and built up this night in her mind as a reward, and yet here she was, being ridiculed in public. The celebration she had dreamed of had been cruelly replaced by a painful reminder of her place in the world. Clara wiped her eyes again, willing herself to stay composed, but the ache in her chest wouldn't subside. She didn't understand how people could be so cruel, how they could judge her without even knowing the smallest part of her story. But she wasn't angry. She was simply defeated. The night that was supposed to bring her joy had stripped her of her dignity instead. She tried to shake off the feeling of shame that clung to her, but it lingered like a shadow, refusing to let go. Michael arrived at the restaurant early the next morning, feeling refreshed after his brief time off. He walked through the elegant dining room, greeted by the familiar clinks of glasses and the murmured conversations of the staff as they prepared for another busy day. For him, managing this restaurant had always been about more than just food. It was about creating an atmosphere where people felt welcomed and valued. It was something he took pride in, especially considering the humble beginnings from which he had come. As he entered his office to review the previous night's reports, he noticed that the usual calm among his staff was slightly off. There was a sense of discomfort in the air, something unspoken lingering just beneath the surface. He overheard two waiters whispering in hushed tones near the kitchen door. Curiosity piqued, Michael called one of them over, his brow furrowed in concern. "Is there something I should know about last night?" Michael asked, keeping his tone light but authoritative. The waiter shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact before finally meeting Michael's gaze. "Well, sir," the waiter began hesitantly, "there was an incident." He glanced around, lowering his voice further as if the very air around them held the secret. "A woman came in, a poor woman from the looks of her. She was treated rather harshly by Mark." The waiter continued, recounting how Clara had been refused a table, how she had tried to explain that she had saved for months to afford the meal, only to be thrown out in front of the entire restaurant. As the story unfolded, Michael's shock deepened. This wasn't just a small misunderstanding. It was an affront to everything he had worked to build within the walls of the restaurant. His mind raced with a mixture of anger and disbelief. He couldn't fathom how anyone, let alone a member of his staff, could behave with such cruelty towards someone based solely on appearance. Michael stood there for a moment, absorbing what he had just learned. He prided himself on maintaining a certain standard of dignity and respect, both for his staff and his patrons. The thought that Clara had been humiliated in such a public way under his watch, even if he hadn't been present, left him deeply unsettled. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the damage it had done to the restaurant's reputation, and more importantly, to the woman who had left feeling crushed and humiliated. Michael couldn't shake the weight of guilt that had settled over him after learning what had happened to Clara. He knew he had to make things right, not just for the restaurant's reputation, but because it was the decent thing to do. The image of her, humiliated and cast out, lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. He made the decision quickly. He needed to find her, to offer his apology in person and, if she allowed, to give her the experience she had been denied. The task wasn't simple. Clara had left the restaurant without a trace, and the city was large. But Michael was determined. He started by speaking with the waiters and other staff who had witnessed the incident. Slowly, through pieced-together conversations, he managed to gather small bits of information. One waiter had overheard Clara mention the neighborhood where she lived. Another remembered seeing her take a particular bus route after the incident. It wasn't much to go on, but it was enough for Michael to begin his search. Over the course of the day, Michael followed up on these leads. He asked around discreetly, visiting small shops and speaking with locals in the area. He described Clara, her modest clothes, her kind demeanor, the look of hurt she carried when she left the restaurant. Eventually, his efforts paid off when a shopkeeper recognized his description and pointed him toward a narrow street lined with old houses where Clara was said to live. When Michael finally arrived at Clara's home, a small weathered building that stood quietly at the end of a forgotten lane, he felt a pang of regret. It was far from the glamorous city center where his restaurant resided, a stark reminder of the different worlds they came from. He approached the door with caution, unsure of how she would react to seeing him there. Clara answered the door cautiously, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and wariness as she recognized the man standing before her. She had no reason to trust him. After all, he was part of the place that had treated her so cruelly. Michael could see the hesitation in her gaze, but he spoke gently, trying to bridge the gap between them. "I'm Michael," he introduced himself softly, his voice sincere. "I'm the manager of the restaurant. I came to personally apologize for what happened to you." But there was something in his tone, in his earnestness, that softened her resolve just enough to listen. Michael continued, "I wasn't there that night, but that doesn't excuse what happened. No one should be treated the way you were, and I want to make it right." He paused, waiting for any sign of acknowledgement. When Clara didn't turn him away, he added, "Please, allow me to invite you back, this time as my guest for the evening you deserved." She hadn't expected anyone to care, let alone come all this way to seek her out. As they sat at a quiet table in the far corner of the restaurant, Michael found himself compelled to share more with Clara than just an apology. There was something about her that reminded him of himself years ago, and the shame of her experience echoed too closely with memories he had long tried to bury. After the first course was served, he cleared his throat and spoke, his voice calm, but tinged with a vulnerability he wasn't accustomed to showing. "You know," he began, his eyes drifting over the elegant dining room, "this place, it's not just a restaurant to me. It's a reminder of how far I've come, and how easy it is to forget where you started. Many years ago, I wasn't so different from you," he admitted, his hands resting gently on the edge of the table. "I grew up in a poor neighborhood, a place where opportunities were few and far between. My family scraped by, barely managing to make ends meet. We had no luxuries, no safety nets. Every day was a struggle just to survive. I thought if I could just get a foot in the door, I could change my life. One day I worked up the courage to come here and apply for a job," Michael continued, his voice steady but laced with the bitterness of old wounds. "I walked in, much like you did, full of hope and determination. But instead of being welcomed, I was turned away. The manager back then, he didn't even give me a chance. He looked at my worn clothes, my rough hands, and dismissed me on the spot. Said I wasn't fit to work in a place like this. I remember standing outside afterward, feeling like I'd been kicked down just for trying to make something of myself. But when I finally came back to this place years later, it wasn't as an applicant. It was as the new manager." Clara sat in silence for a moment after hearing Michael's story, her heart swelling with an unexpected sense of connection. She had come to this restaurant hoping for a night of indulgence, a fleeting escape from her own difficult reality. Yet, instead of merely receiving a meal, she was being offered something far more meaningful, a shared understanding of hardship, of rejection, and ultimately, of perseverance. As the next course was brought to the table, an exquisite dish plated with precision and care, Michael looked at her with an air of sincerity that went beyond his role as the restaurant's manager. "Tonight," he said softly, "I want you to enjoy everything this place has to offer. You're our guest, Clara. No restrictions, no limits. Order whatever you like and know that you deserve every bit of it." The idea of choosing from an entire menu, items she had only heard about in passing, felt overwhelming. But Michael's reassurance, coupled with the gentle atmosphere that had begun to unfold between them, gave her the courage to do something she hadn't done in a long time, allow herself to indulge without guilt. She ordered a dish she had never tasted before, something with ingredients she could barely pronounce. As it arrived, delicate and artfully presented, she took a moment to savor the sight of it. The experience of sitting at that table, surrounded by the soft hum of the restaurant and the glow of candlelight, made her feel like she was stepping into a different world. As the meal progressed, Clara found herself relaxing. For the first time that evening, she wasn't thinking about the people who had judged her when she first walked through those doors. She wasn't thinking about the money she had saved or the sacrifice it had taken to get here. Instead, she was present, fully and completely, in the moment. Every bite she took was rich with flavor, each dish more delightful than the last. But it wasn't just the food that made the evening special. It was the way she was being treated, with respect, with dignity, as though she were no different from the wealthiest patron in the room. For a woman who had spent most of her life being overlooked, it was a profound shift in how she saw herself. Michael, ever attentive but never overbearing, checked in on her periodically, offering kind words and ensuring that she was comfortable. It wasn't just about making up for what had happened the night before. It was about showing her that she mattered, that her presence here was valued. The night unfolded with a quiet elegance that made Clara feel lighter than she had in years. She wasn't just a poor woman who had been mistreated. She was someone worth caring for, someone deserving of kindness. As she sat there with Michael across from her, sharing stories and laughter, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't anticipated when she had first walked through the doors. And for that evening, in that space, the barriers between them, those built by class, circumstance, and past experiences, began to dissolve. As the evening began to wind down, Michael signaled to one of the waiters, who disappeared toward the back of the restaurant. Clara, feeling content and relaxed, didn't think much of it until she noticed a familiar face hesitantly approaching their table. It was Mark, the very man who had humiliated her the night before. His posture was stiff, his face pale with a mixture of shame and discomfort. Michael's eyes remained calm as Mark stood before them, but there was an unmistakable firmness in his voice when he spoke. "Mark," he began quietly, yet with authority, "I asked you to join us tonight because I believe there's something you need to say." But Michael's steady gaze held him in place, and after a few moments of tense silence, Mark finally spoke. Mark's voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat before continuing. "I'm sorry," he said, the words barely audible at first. He looked down, unable to meet Clara's eyes as he confessed, "I judged you based on your appearance. I thought you didn't belong here. I never even stopped to consider your story, or what might have brought you through those doors." Mark swallowed hard, continuing with his confession. "The truth is, I've never had to struggle like you have," he admitted, his voice faltering. "I've never had to save for months just to afford a single meal, or face the kind of judgment that I put on you. I was wrong. I treated you unfairly, and I'm sorry. It wasn't just a perfunctory apology. There was real emotion behind it, a realization that had clearly taken hold of him after the events of the previous night." Michael, sensing the sincerity in Mark's words, softened slightly, but didn't let the moment pass without a lesson. "Mark," he said firmly, "running a restaurant isn't just about food, service, or the ambiance. It's about people. Every person who walks through that door deserves to be treated with respect and kindness, regardless of who they are or where they come from. It's not our place to judge someone by their clothes or their wallet." Though the pain of the previous night still lingered, Clara could see that this was a man learning, perhaps for the first time, how to truly empathize with another person's struggle. She didn't speak immediately, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. There was no rush to forgive, but there was something in Mark's demeanor that told her he was sincere, and that was enough to soften her heart, if only just a little. As the night drew to a close, Clara felt an odd sense of peace wash over her. She had come to the restaurant expecting nothing more than a chance to enjoy a good meal, but instead, she had found an unexpected connection with Michael and a long overdue apology from Mark. It had been an evening filled with revelations, and now that it was winding down, Clara felt ready to leave the past behind and move forward. She was gathering her thoughts, preparing to thank Michael for his kindness and bid him good night, when she noticed that he wasn't finished. There was a shift in his posture, a new intensity in his eyes as he looked at her, something that told her there was more to come. "Clara," Michael began, his voice gentle but purposeful, "tonight wasn't just about making up for what happened yesterday. It was about recognizing something in you that I believe deserves more than just an apology." She had expected a simple conclusion to the evening, but Michael's tone suggested that something larger was at play. He took a breath, then continued. "You've shown incredible strength and determination in the face of hardship," he said, leaning slightly forward as he spoke. "Most people wouldn't have had the courage to come back after what you went through last night. You did, and that tells me something important about your character." "I've been thinking," Michael said, his eyes now fully focused on her. "Someone with your humility, your dedication, and your resilience is exactly the kind of person I want on my team. This restaurant isn't just about serving food, it's about the people who work here, and I think you would be a valuable addition." Michael wasn't just offering her a second chance at dining in the restaurant, he was offering her a place within it, a job. "I'd like to offer you a position here," Michael said plainly. "I believe you have the kind of heart and spirit that could help make this place better. If you're willing, I'd be honored to have you as part of the team." Clara accepted Michael's offer with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She had never imagined herself working in such an elegant place, but the opportunity felt like a lifeline, one she couldn't afford to pass up. From the moment she walked through the doors on her first day, she knew it wouldn't be easy. The polished, fast-paced environment was unlike anything she had experienced before, and she felt out of place among the more experienced staff. But Clara was no stranger to hard work. She threw herself into her duties with quiet determination, learning everything she could about the restaurant, its customers, and the rhythm of the place. At first, her co-workers were skeptical. Some remembered the scene from her first visit and wondered if she would last. But Clara wasn't deterred. She greeted every day with a smile, treating each task, no matter how small, with care and attention. Slowly but surely, Clara began to earn the respect of her colleagues. Her kindness was infectious, and her humility was refreshing in a world where egos often clashed. She never complained, even when the work was grueling or when the demands of the evening felt overwhelming. Instead, she approached each challenge with patience and grace, always willing to lend a hand to those who needed it. It wasn't long before the customers began to notice her as well. Regular patrons, started requesting Clara by name, drawn to her genuine warmth and attentiveness. Unlike some of the other servers who treated their job as a performance, Clara treated her role as a way to connect with people. She listened to their stories, remembered their preferences, and made them feel valued, no matter who they were. Her quiet dedication didn't go unnoticed by Michael either. He watched as Clara transformed from a woman who had once been humiliated in his restaurant to someone who was now an integral part of its success. It wasn't just her work ethic that impressed him. It was her ability to change the very atmosphere of the place. With Clara there, the restaurant seemed more welcoming, more human. What had begun as an act of atonement for the restaurant's earlier wrongs had evolved into something far greater. Clara's presence had reshaped the dynamic of the team, bringing out the best in those around her. And though her own struggles had been many, Clara now found herself in a position she had never imagined. She was thriving. Each day she stepped through the doors. She felt a sense of pride that had once been foreign to her. She no longer saw herself as the poor woman who had been thrown out. She saw herself as someone who belonged, someone who had earned her place not just through hard work, but through the strength of her character. Months after Clara had become a beloved part of the restaurant, Michael decided to host a special charity event. The event was dedicated to supporting a local community in need, and it quickly gained attention from patrons eager to contribute to a good cause. The restaurant was abuzz with activity, decorations were lavish, the atmosphere was festive, and people from all walks of life came together for the night. It was more than just a fundraiser, it was a celebration of community, compassion, and connection. As part of the evening, Michael had arranged for several speakers to share their personal stories, tales of struggle, perseverance, and the impact the restaurant had made in their lives. Clara, of course, was one of those speakers. Michael knew that her story was powerful and that it would resonate with everyone in the room, but neither of them could have anticipated the emotional revelation that was about to unfold. When it was Clara's turn to take the stage, she stood before the crowded dining room, the spotlight gently illuminating her face. She looked out at the familiar faces, customers, co-workers, even friends she had made along the way. Her heart swelled with gratitude, and for a moment, she felt the weight of everything she had endured and overcome. She began her speech by recounting her first encounter with the restaurant, the night she had been humiliated and cast out, only to be brought back in by Michael's kindness. She spoke of how that one act had changed the course of her life, giving her the chance not only to work, but to heal, to find dignity and respect in a place that had once denied her both. But as Clara continued, she shifted to a deeper part of her story, something she had never shared with Michael or anyone else at the restaurant. Growing up, Clara began, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. I was separated from my family at a young age. My brother and I, we were split up due to circumstances beyond our control. I've spent years trying to find him, but I never had any luck. If he was safe, if he had found happiness, if he even remembered me. And over the years, I lost hope that I would ever find him. But I never imagined that the man who would change my life, the man who gave me a second chance, would turn out to be the brother I had been searching for all along. In that moment, the truth hit them both with a force neither could have anticipated. The memories, the fragmented pieces of their childhood, came rushing back. They had been separated for so long that neither had recognized the other, until now. Michael stood frozen, his mind racing as the realization sank in. His eyes locked with Clara's, and the room seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them standing on the precipice of a reunion that was years in the making. For a few long moments, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, Michael walked toward Clara, tears now brimming in his own eyes. He embraced her tightly, the emotions overwhelming them both. The room erupted into applause, though for Clara and Michael, it felt as though time had stopped. They had found each other in the most unexpected of places, their lives forever intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. What had begun as a story of hardship and survival had now transformed into one of healing and reunion. And as they held each other, they knew that no matter where life had taken them, fate had brought them back together when they needed it most.